Today we'll talk about 6 degrees of separation and 3 degrees of influence. First, let's start with 6 degrees of separation. It came from a classic experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. Stanley Milgram was one of the greatest social psychologists. He was also a controversial figure, partly because of his another experiment that was called the obedience to authority. In the experiment, research participants were told to administer painful electric shocks to another human being. The other human being was just acting and was not harmed, but those participants didn't know it. The purpose of the experiment was to determine to what extent people would obey orders, even when they were asked to harm others, and even when they were asked to do something that were against their values. What were the results of the experiment? Influenced by authority and power, people are actually capable of harming innocent others. In administrative science, the idea of obedience to authority can explain why people in organizations are sometimes aggressive and destructive to others. There are powerful figures in organizational hierarchy who demand obedience and loyalty from their subordinates. There are also bureaucracies, protocols, and the interest of organizations that shield people from consequences of aggressive and destructive behaviors. In this video, we focus on a different experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram. In this experiment, Milgram gave letters to about 300 people in Boston, Massachusetts, and Omaha, Nebraska. They were told by Milgram to send the letters to a single target person who was a stockbroker working in Boston. The rule was that letter recipient could only send the letter onto somebody whom they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram then asked people how many steps it would take to get the letter from one place to another. The result was that it took about 6 steps from the letter to reach the stockbroker in Boston. The number 6 came from the median of 5 intermediate people. This is the origin of the phrase 6 degrees of separation. The experiment was named the Small World Experiment. If 2 people are 5 intermediaries apart, are they close or far apart? Milgram's interpretation was that they were actually far apart. Almost anyone in the United States was a few intermediaries apart from the President of the United States. Mathematically speaking, number 5 was small, but there was an enormous psychological distance between the 2 people who were 5 intermediaries apart. A more accurate interpretation should be that we are 5 social circles of acquaintances apart, or 5 social structures apart. The phrase 6 degrees of separation has been used frequently. The Milgram's small world experiment has been cited repeatedly by scientists, but it appears that not many scientists have attempted to replicate the experiment to validate the results. In Duncan Watts' book, 6 Degrees, The Science of a Connected Age, he shared more details about the small world experiment. There were about 300 participants who were asked to send the letter to the stockbroker in Boston, but about 100 of them were in Boston. Moreover, of the almost 200 people in Omaha, Nebraska, half of them were stock investors who were asked to send the letters to the stockbroker in Boston. To select the rest of the participants, Milgram picked 96 people out of the Nebraska mailing list. Of 96 letters starting from them, only 18 letters reached the final target in Boston. For any experiment, this was a very small sample. But people have extrapolated the findings from this experiment to the entire population in the world. Some scientists attempted to replicate the small world experiment using letters and email messages, but the completion rate has been very low, not even 1%. Less than 1% of all chains reached the target. In comparison, Milgram's completion rate of 20% was impressive, but the replication experiment had a big sample size of more than 98,000 subjects. The result of the replication experiment was still about 6 steps to get an email to a targeted person. Another takeaway from the replications of Milgram's small world experiment is that even though the social networks are wide, people navigate social networks by using only a couple of dimensions. Most dominant dimensions were geography and occupation. Other dimensions include ethnicity, socioeconomic status, education, religion, and personal interests. Those were the dimensions that we used as we evaluated our own ego networks over the last 2 weeks in this course. As long as we have at least 2 dimensions along which we could judge our similarity to others, even in a world where most of our connections are to people who are very much like us, we could still find short paths to unfamiliar individuals. In network analysis, it is called geodesic distance, the shortest path between 2 nodes. Here is one of the replication studies of Milgram's small world experiment. In 2003, the article titled An Experimental Study of Search in Global Social Networks was published in Science. This article was the first large-scale replication of Milgram's small world experiment. In the replication study, mails were replaced with emails. Researchers recruited over 60,000 email users who were asked to reach one of 18 target persons in 13 countries by forwarding messages to acquaintances. The findings were consistent with the one in Milgram's small world experiment. The median steps it took for an email user to reach the target was between 5 and 7. Of course, there were small variations in path length. How were the email messages transmitted from the sender to the target? In the experiment, about 2/3 of the senders passed the message to their friends, followed by relatives at 10%, coworkers at 9%, siblings at 5%, and significant others at only 3%. How strong were the ties? In the experiment, acquaintances were considered as fairly close. About 48% of the ties were weak ties. The tie strength were not strong, but they were equally important for social connectivity. If you investigate the origin of those friendship ties, almost half of the ties were formed through work or school affiliations. About 25% of the friendship ties were formed through work, just like Sheldon Cooper's friends were his co-workers in universities. About 22% of friendship ties were formed through schools and universities. That's another benefit of education. Education expands your knowledge base. It also substantially expands your social networks. You get to meet all sorts of people with different backgrounds. The social ties you build through your education experience were the ones you usually don't get from families, mutual friends, and the internet. In the experiment, did people tend to pass the messages to those who were in the same gender group? The answer is yes. About 57% of men passed the messages more frequently to other men, and about 61% of women passed the messages more frequently to other women. In 2008, Facebook analyzed its users' social networks. It turned out a majority of Facebook users were 5.2 steps away. What does it mean? It means that on Facebook, people were 5.2 degrees of separation, and the number has been decreasing over time. In 2011, most of Facebook users were connected through only 4.7 steps. Here is the question to you all. What were the implications of the decreasing degree separation on social media? Should we be surprised that it takes only 6 steps to reach a stranger in the world? Suppose each of us know about 100 other people on a first-name basis. In fact, for most people, the number is significantly larger than 100. How many people do you know by name? The estimate made by sociologists is between 200 to 500 people. Here, for simplicity, let's assume you know about 100 other people on a first-name basis. Then each of your friends has 100 friends, so you are 2 steps away from 10,000 people. Suppose each of your friends' friends has 100 friends, you are 3 steps away from 1 million people. Following this reasoning, you are 4 steps away from 100 million people and 5 steps away from 10 billion people. How many people do we have in the world? It's about 7.6 billion people as of February 2021. Mathematically, there is nothing wrong with this reasoning, but the problem is that this is not how real social networks work. Your friends tend to know your friends. Many of your 100 friends will know each other. As a result, we think about the people you can reach by following your friendship ties. Many of those ties go from one friend to another, not to the rest of the world. The number 10,000 came from assuming that each of your friends was linked to 100 new people. But without this assumption, the number of your friends you could reach in 2 steps could be much smaller. And some nodes in your social networks are highly clustered, like the node in green color you see on the screen. 6 degrees of separation tells us how socially separated we are from each other in this world. But it does not mean that we can influence all of the people around us. When it comes to the spread of influence in social networks, there is a principle called the 3 degrees of influence. That is, our influence ripples through our social networks to our friends' friends, and our friends' friends' friends. After that, our influence begins to fade away, and our influence on the people does not go beyond the 3 degrees of separation. The principle of 3 degrees of influence applies to a wide range of ideas, attitudes, feelings, behaviors, political views, lifestyles, and happiness. And word-of-mouth recommendations for everyday concern, like how to find a good tutor for your children, tend to spread to 3 degrees in social networks as well. There are 3 possible explanations of 3 degrees of influence. The first explanation is the intrinsic decay of influence. You drop a stone into water. The stone displaces a certain volume of water, creating ripples. The energy in the water wave dissipates as it spreads out. Likewise, in social networks, the accuracy of information decays as the information is transmitted in social networks. So if you think person A is a reliable coworker, by the time the information reaches your coworker's 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 coworker, who is 4 degrees away from you, the information may be inaccurate or distorted. This is called the intrinsic decay. The second explanation is network instability. Our social networks are constantly evolving. New ties are developed and old ties are abandoned or lost. Friends stopped being friends, neighbors move, couples divorce, and people die. Our social ties beyond 3 degrees are unstable. You may not know your sister's husband's co-worker's brother very well. You may not even know him at all. For a person who is 3 degrees removed from you, any change in those 3 social ties can stop the social influence. As a result, you do not influence people at the 4 degrees and beyond. Neither are we influenced by people at the 4 degrees and beyond. The third explanation is our cognitive constraint. In the 1993 paper, Robin Dunbar proposed a Dunbar number, 150. Dunbar examined the relationship between brain size and group size in a variety of primates. He argued that the expected size of social groups in humans based on our big brains should be about 150. The Dunbar number includes both strong ties and weak ties. Most of us have only a few strong ties. The Dunbar number is the maximum number of humans in which every member knows every other member, knows whether they are friends or foes, knows whether they are friendly or hostile, and knows the relationship among them. The Dunbar number is a theoretical upper limit for an individual's social network. For centuries, the size of fighting units in armies has been about 150. With modern technologies, the group size in modern armies has not changed. About 130 to 150 soldiers are commanded by captains. The mean size of the company is about 180. The Dunbar number suggests an upper limit on the size of a group. In this group, members can work together as a coordinated unit and know their strengths, weaknesses, and the reliability of their peers. We have a cognitive constraint when it comes to track who is connected to whom, how strong or weak those social ties are, whether they are friends or foes, to whom we owe favors, whether we've double-crossed them, and who is who in a complex pecking order in an organizational hierarchy. The association between the size of social networks and brain structure is observed in monkeys as well. Monkeys living in larger groups have larger volumes in gray matter in brain regions that are associated with monkeys' dominance in social networks. For humans, the size and complexity of our social networks is also correlated with cortical thickness in 3 brain regions that are associated with social behavior. 2 of those brain regions are related to amygdala connectivity. One function of the amygdala is to process emotions, which are important in navigating our social life. The size of your social networks can be measured by the total number of regular contacts you maintain. The complexity of your social networks can be measured by the number of different groups your contacts belong to. If your social networks are bigger and more complex than others, your social skills are likely to be associated with larger amygdala volume and better amygdala connectivity. Good social skills help us get along with group members. This requires us to learn who is trustworthy, and who cozy up to you because what resources you have, but not because who you are. Good social skills also help us get ahead. This requires us to know when and with whom to build an alliance with group members, and know when and how not to be outmaneuvered, and how not to be a sucker who is used by group members as a means to an end. An example is Abraham Lincoln. He was empathetic. He turned his political rivals to his allies. His Secretary of War during the Civil War, Edwin Stanton, was an early critic of Lincoln's administration. But Lincoln trusted Stanton, and they developed a close relationship during the war. When Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, Stanton famously said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Those good social skills do not come out of nowhere. The infrastructure that powers your social skills come from your brain structure and function. In this video, we discussed the 6 degrees of separation and the 3 degrees of influence. In the next video, we'll learn the theory of strength of weak ties.